Yang Berhormat Hannah Yeoh, former Deputy Minister of Women, Family and Community Development and MP of Segambut, Your Excellencies High Commissioner of Australia and Ambassador of Sweden, Acting High Commissioner of Canada, members of the diplomatic community, members of the media, leaders of key institutions, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and to our viewers watching online, a very good morning and welcome to C4 Centre's report launch titled Foundations and Donations, Political Financing, Corruption and the Pursuit of Power. My name is Arif Hamizan with C4 Centre, and I am your MC for this event this morning. Please join me to welcome on stage our speakers for today's event. Yang Berhormat Hannah Yeoh, Professor Edmund Terence Gomez, Chairman of the Board, C4 Centre, Cynthia Gabriel, Executive Director, C4 Centre, and Lalita Kunaratnam, Senior Research Consultant, C4 Centre. Thank you. I would now like to invite Cynthia Gabriel to deliver the welcome speech.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Okay, we weren't allowed to have too many people in the hall in the beginning until the hotel decided to upgrade us, but it was too late to call a bigger group. But we're very fortunate actually to have a host of institutions, members of the diplomatic community, the Bar Council, Suhakam, I believe MACC is also supposed to be present, and many distinguished NGO colleagues and members of the media. Now I'd like to welcome you to the Sheraton. Now this is not another Sheraton move, but we wanted to pick this hotel for the significance somehow this hotel has had on very serious political developments in the past. And it is very, very contextualized and significant for something we wanted to welcome you today to the launch of our report called Foundations and Donations, Political Financing, Corruption, and the Pursuit of Power. So maybe that's what this is all about in a nutshell, that we see in today's political landscape, the power grab, the endless counting of numbers, the suspension of parliament, and the backroom politics. And I think what C4 Centre is known for is its investigative work, its reputed work on trying to connect the difficult dots on how corruption actually manifests itself in this country. And it's one of the things that we are extremely grateful for, that we have very diligent staff members, and we have very, very insightful and knowledgeable board members, especially Professor Terence Gomez, who has guided us on several reports, including this one, and to actually highlight a number of things that we may have missed. We keep reading about many things post-GE14, for example, about high-profile corruption trials and the different testimonies that come out. It may shock us and put us in awe for maybe an hour, and then another drama takes place and we forget about it and we tend to miss some important details. But one of the things we wanted to highlight really is this entire story or experience that we've had to suffer with on the whole issue of money politics, this whole issue of financing of politics, and this entire issue of how political parties have found extremely sophisticated ways to divert financing for their own personal gain and for the political parties they represent to win the elections and to keep staying in power. Now, we're not here to bring ourselves even more trouble. In this kind of country, blowing the whistle is something which is dangerous. It's a dangerous job. But we've done a very thorough research. I'm very thankful to the researchers, the consultants, and the advisors that have put so much time and energy into this entire report, that everything that is in the report is actually based on testimonies in court, news articles that have been reported, and the important part about connecting the dots and how they connect back to political power and the pursuit of power in this country. Now, I'm not going to take very long, except to say that the whole issue of money politics, political financing, it's not something new. It's also something we've been championing together with other civil society groups, with the Bar Council, on developing better legislation, which we don't have one now. And we came up with something that you will find on our website that looks like this. It's called Reforms for Transparent, Accountable Political Financing in Malaysia, which was something that Professor Terence had worked on as well, together with G25, C4, and 70 other civil society groups that had endorsed it. This is good, serious content of what should go into an ideal legislation. And perhaps members of the diplomatic community can later share what you have in your own countries as well. Unfortunately, when GE14 came, there was a lot of hope that there would finally be a legislation. And there was a draft, some sort, that we were also privy to some details of what could actually go into a good draft. But unfortunately, that response was also a little half-hearted on the Pakatan Harapan administration side. It never saw its day in Parliament. It never got debated. It was left at the select committee level to discuss it further, study it further, and I'm not sure what else was left to study because there was a lot of work that had already gone into it. But right now, following the Sheraton move, I think one of the things we wanted to say is the extreme disappointment of where it possibly is, perhaps in the trash can, perhaps in the bin, because we really don't know where this entire movement around a possible legislation could actually take place now, following the Sheraton move. But for today, let me just say one thing, that while we are struggling towards law reforms and better reforms towards good governance, human rights, and democracy, there's still so much that we're uncovering. We're living in a time of cartels. There are cartels in the police force, cartels in the immigration, and lately we find ourselves even exposed to cartels in the civil service, how tenders and awards are actually given out. And we have things like the Macau scam, which is unthinkable that police personnel of rank and file, very high, could possibly also be complicit. Now, I'm not saying anything seditious here, but everything that we read in the news, and as Malaysians, we're not quite sure what to do, how to do, what is it that we actually need to reform come GE15. But today is another very, very serious expose, so to speak. Not really something very new, but something that would still shock us, that the level and extent of how money is being thieved out, money is being financed for political purposes, are being even more sophisticated, being used, different platforms are being used, and so on and so forth. Now, I'm not going to say too much because two very learned people are here, and a very brave member of parliament who has actually agreed to say yes, because almost no one was actually willing to come forward to speak about the inside stories of what happens in political parties. But we invited YB Hannah to also comment on the report. And if she wanted to share an experience or two, we'd leave it to her liberty to do that. Now, before we get into the details, I just wanted to thank everybody again and start us off with a very short video which is basically essentials of what the report is about, what the findings are about. And this video is to highlight some things we may have missed in some of the court testimonies and some of the things that we wanted to actually discuss more pertinently this morning. So thank you again for coming, members of the media, members of the diplomatic community, and members of very important public institutions that are with us today, together with our NGO colleagues. Thank you.
Over the past few years, several major political figures have been embroiled in shocking court cases involving corruption, money laundering, and criminal breach of trust. But apart from the dark connection of politics and business, there is one other thing linking all of these cases together. One thing that some of us might have missed. At the center of each case is a foundation, or yayasan, which has been used as a tool to channel money into the political system. From these cases, we now clearly see that foundations can be and are abused by those in power. How did we get here? And why did we not see this before? Let's start with the basics. What are foundations? In Malaysia, foundations fall under the umbrella definition of charities set up for activities such as alleviating poverty, promoting religion, and sponsoring education. They can be registered as a non-profit organization monitored by the Registrar of Societies of Malaysia, or as a company monitored by the Companies Commission of Malaysia. There are also cases of unregistered foundations. So how and why are these charitable institutions used for political motives, which in some cases have involved corruption? There are several key reasons. Firstly, because foundations are far from the view of the general public and oversight institutions such as the Electoral Commission, they can be used to quietly raise funds during campaign and non-campaign periods. Secondly, no law requires donations to politically linked foundations to be publicly disclosed. There is also no legal requirement for foundations to publicly declare their donations to political parties or politicians. Thirdly, current laws which oversee the financing of election campaigns pay no heed to the flow of funds from foundations. Lastly, there is no disclosure about the sponsors of these foundations and how funds are channeled by them to parties or politicians. The people who get access to these funds and how they are used within the political system are issues that are not publicly known. Because of how integral money is to political power in Malaysia, all of these reasons make foundations an attractive way for politicians to accumulate money in less transparent ways. Why is this a problem? Simply put, an unregulated flow of money into politics increases the risk of corruption. Recent court cases involving top politicians have revealed that foundations handle staggering sums of money which are prone to abuse. Zahid Hamidi's Yayasan Akal Budi case involved 31 million ringgit that was allegedly misappropriated. Tengku Adnan Tengku Mansor, as chairman of Yayasan Wilayah Persekutuan, was allegedly involved in unscrupulous land deals expected to register profits of 138 million ringgit for the foundation. In 2018, Lembaga Tabung Haji lodged a police report over Yayasan Tabung Haji's 2017 programs, where over 22 million ringgit was allegedly disbursed for politically linked activities. This happened when Abdul Aziz Abdul Rahim was the chairman of Lembaga Tabung Haji. In addition, large corporations donate millions to politically linked foundations. This by itself is not wrong, but some companies have been found to donate in exchange for political favors. We need to reform how politics is financed in Malaysia, especially when it comes to foundations. Many other politicians are also on the board of their own foundations. Are all of these foundations as charitable and accountable as they should be? Should politicians serving the public office and their families control foundations that are beyond public scrutiny? If Malaysia is truly to ever escape from money politics, patronage and corruption, we must also start paying close attention to foundations and the politicians who run them. For an in-depth look at connections between donations to foundations and political financing in Malaysia, read C4 Centre's report, Foundations and Donations, Political Financing, Corruption and the Pursuit of Power, available at c4centre.org.
Thank you, Cynthia. To present the key findings in the report, please welcome the authors of the report, Lalita Kunaratnam and Professor Edmund Terence Gomez.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? They can't hear me. Mic is not working. Okay, the mic is working now. Thank you. Thank you for coming to the launch of this report. I'd like to congratulate the C4 and the team, especially Lalita, for the work that has been put into this report. In 2018, I published a book entitled Minister of Finance Incorporated. In that book, we studied the government-linked system, government-linked companies, how to the shadow world, a shadow market through which they finance the political system. This book clearly indicated that there was this concept of dark money. Dark money was being moved through the government into the political system. The links between politicians and business had taken a new turn. If we were now seeing a system where politics and business was between private firms and politicians in power, now we were seeing a system of where governments controlled by politicians were being exploited to channel money into their political parties. That itself was a major expose. In 2018, soon after the government fell, corruption cases were filed against these politicians who were involved in this dark world, in this 1MDB type nexus involving political parties, politicians in power, and private firms. But what was exposed during the corruption cases was very interesting. It drew attention to another phenomenon, another institution. This institution, is there another mic I can use? Is it okay now? Okay, let me get on with this. What was central in these court cases, it kept coming up, was the financing of politics, but through another institution within the political system, and that was foundations. What they showed was money was being channeled from the private sector, as well as bodies, 1MDB for example, as well as other GLCs, including the GLICs like Khazanah and Petronas. Money was being channeled into these foundations, which was then used to finance party and general elections. What we also saw was when this money went into these foundations, they were channeled down to the grassroots, to the party members, further reinforcing the point of the politics of patronage that had now come to be the order of the day in Malaysian politics. What we were also seeing here was that these kinds of foundations were not only existing at the federal level, they were also prevalent at the state level. We were shocked at the number of foundations that were in the system, controlled by politicians, and we knew nothing about these foundations. Yes, they were mentioned in the court cases, but we did not connect the dots to show how these foundations had now become another covert tool by politicians in the financing of their political activities. Interestingly, also, the court cases revealed two important factors. One, the volume we were talking about here was stupendous. An incredible amount of money was being brought into the political system, and we had no clue where this money was coming from. What it also involved was high levels of corruption. The court cases brought that out very well. The question that then emerged to us was this: where is all this money coming from? When did politicians begin using foundations as a mechanism for political financing? So let me take you now back in history. To understand this phenomenon, we go back to 1981. I'm not saying that there were no foundations before 1981, but I'm talking about the links between foundations and political parties and the financing of politics. In 1981, Mahathir Mohamad came to power, and he changed the way in which the political system began to operate in a fundamental way. He talked about the need for public policies, such as the Bumiputra commercial and industrial community, to create a new Malay capitalist class. And how was he going to do this? Selective patronage. He would take government concessions and pass it to those who he felt were winners, and these winners were now going to emerge as major figures in the corporate sector, controlling conglomerates. Something else happened in 1981. At that time, there was a major battle in UMNO for the post of deputy president, Razali Hamza versus Musa Hitam. In that election, for the first time, we saw the use of money during the UMNO General Assembly to buy votes. It happened again in 1984. It happened again in 1986, 1987, when we had the fight, Team A versus Team B. The volume of money had continued to grow in these party elections. Team A, Team B was when Razali and Musa combined forces to take on Mahathir and came within a whisker of capturing power. Soon after that, there was a major destabilization of the party. UMNO was declared an illegal party. Mahathir forms UMNO Baru, and he changes the rules for elections. From now on, if you want to win the elections, it's not about winning elections during the General Assembly. You have to go down to the grassroots. And here, mind you, we are talking about, according to the party, about 3 million members. So if you wanted to win the elections, you had to use a lot of money to get enough nominations to run in the General Assembly. The whole system had changed again. And then a new phenomenon emerged. In 1993, we had a major fight for the post of deputy presidency. Anwar Ibrahim versus Ghaffar Baba. Anwar created what was known as the Wawasan team, the Vision team. The Vision team comprised people such as Muhyiddin, at that time Chief Minister of Selangor, Muhammad Taib, Chief Minister of Selangor, Najib Razak. The way he selected his team was because these people had enormous grassroots support at the state level. The Wawasan team won. And in that election, the volume of money that flowed into the party was huge. We had not seen this kind of money flowing into the party before. And why was there such a huge volume of money being used in this election? Because that money had to be channeled down to the grassroots to win enough nominations so that you can run as deputy president or for the other posts, such as vice president, as well as UMNO Youth. This was a momentous point in Malaysian history. The members of the Wawasan team, in UMNO, it's important to note this, Anwar came with a whisker of becoming prime minister before he was ousted in 1998. But two other members of the Wawasan team, Muhyiddin and Najib, went on to become prime ministers of Malaysia. What we also saw in this party election was the creation now of the phenomenon of warlords. Now, if you wanted to win an election, you had to have lots of money. But something else was happening in this election which I want to draw your attention to. Remember, I mentioned that Mahathir wanted to create corporate captains, Malay corporate captains. If you go back to that momentous election in 1993, during the debates, they brought up the concepts of Korporat Melayu, corporate Malay. They brought up the concept of Melayu Baru, New Malay, making a distinction between the old Malay and the new Malay. The new Malay is this corporate Melayu, the new middle class. So you're seeing here in this election the monetization of politics and the creation of a nexus between politics and business, the so-called corporate Melayu. All this soon came to be embedded in the political system. Then we began to see a new phenomenon, the concept of the revolving door. Politicians entering into business, businessmen entering into politics. Among the key members of this revolving door was Daim Zainuddin, a businessman brought into the political system who became finance minister, then left the political system, then returned back into the political system and went out, the revolving door. Anwar and his team too began to create a revolving door. Politicians in UMNO now were entering business in a big way. They were now getting access to government rents. They were now becoming corporate players. So now we are seeing the phenomenon of politicians becoming businessmen and key figures in the corporate sector. Before it was connected businessmen who had the patronage of Mahathir and Daim who had become key players in the corporate system. Two different key actors in the corporate system, both contributing to the financing of politics. Today, if you read the report, we have a case study on Zahid Hamidi and Adnan Mansour. Zahid Hamidi was a politician, a political secretary linked to Najib Razak. He then enters into business. He uses the Yayasan, he uses a foundation which was controlled by UMNO Youth. Through that foundation, he has links to important companies such as publicly listed Karatham Holdings. By his own admission, Zahid says, I became rich through Karatham Holdings. He then goes on, by his own admission, to be involved in a number of publicly listed firms. And then he enters mainstream politics. He becomes an MP in Bagandato. Then he goes on to create his own personal foundations, which are now at the center of these cases that you are now seeing in court. Then we have Adnan Mansour. Adnan Mansour took a different route. He started out in business. And then he enters into politics, and he was part of that 1993 campaign where he got elected into the Supreme Council. Now you're beginning to see how money had become important in UMNO elections. I'm showing you the different routes through which politicians were now entering into business, as well as businessmen were entering into politics. The whole picture was becoming extremely complex. Mahathir, recognizing that this was happening, then said, we need to have a General Assembly to solve this problem. He said at the General Assembly, if once we were poor, now we are very rich. If once we gathered to discuss our poverty, he was talking about Malay poverty, now he was referring to how a new elite, a rich elite, had been created. This is our history. Mahathir admitted it. He said a cancer had permeated body. The words of the good doctor. The cancer had now spread deep into UMNO. This destabilized the party again. In 1998, we saw another fracture in the party, Mahathir versus Anwar. As you can see here, the persistent destabilization of UMNO because of money politics. I'd like to move forward from that defining moment in 1998, where Anwar is ousted, to 2013. In that period, we had two prime ministers, Abdullah, who came to power, and Abdullah mentioned that we have to clean up corruption in Malaysia. He did not do it. In 2009, Najib came to power. And remember, Najib came to power soon after the global financial crisis emerged. The economy was in recession. And when he took power, he said, we must do this. We must eradicate corruption, rent-seeking, and patronage. His words. And he did not do it. In fact, it became worse. In 2013, that was a momentous election because Najib wanted to further consolidate his position. Remember, in 2008, they did very badly. They lost 5 state governments. 2013 was a momentous election where Najib wanted to regain lost ground. The volume of money that was used now in the general election, this is not party election, in the general election was also huge. This was the first time we could clearly see the volume of money that was being dispersed during the general election was unprecedented in an attempt to regain lost ground, the pursuit of power. Where was all this money coming from? 2 years later, we found out. 1MDB, a GLC, created by Najib, a covert mechanism through which he could garner funds, which he then used to channel into the political system. The difference is, here now the money had entered the larger electoral system. If before we were talking about money politics within UMNO, now we were talking about serious money politics, serious distribution of money, big money, during a general election. Now money politics was permeating the country. The situation was getting dire. Much of this was exposed in the book, Minister of Finance Incorporated. This complex world that had been created both at the federal level, at the state level too, to find ways and means to draw money which can be used to fight during general and state elections. No party supported the reform of the financing of politics, there was no discussion, even after Pakatan came to power, to reform the GLC world. Mahathir himself called it the monster. That was his word, the word he used, the monster. But when he came to power, he did not move to reform this GLC world because it was too important to the political system. Through this GLC world, you could also get access to money, and you can also use it to play the politics of patronage, to consolidate power, the pursuit of power. No politician, whether in Barisan Nasional or in Pakatan, were willing to make the change. That is the situation we now find ourselves in. This brings me now to foundations. Another new covert tool that we have now been exposed to, fortunately through the trials, the serious corruption cases which is now going on in court. How bad is this situation of the monetization of politics in this country? When will the political will arise to deal with this? So how bad is the situation? Let me stop here and show you the new evidence that we have found, or which, as Cynthia said, this is not new. It's there in the public domain. But we are just trying to bring out to you more clearly, connecting the dots about how foundations are used in the political system to finance politics. For this, let me invite Lalita to show you what we have uncovered by trying to connect the dots between foundations and politicians. Lalita?
Testing. Okay. Good morning. I'm Lalita Kunaratnam. In this report's appendix, we focus on 7 individuals with high-profile corruption cases in court. Before we proceed to the cases, let's first look at the foundations owned by the current Prime Minister. Okay. We shall start with Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin. He's the 8th and current Prime Minister of Malaysia. Foundations controlled by or linked to Muhyiddin. Here are some foundations linked to him. He is or was either a director, trustee, or shareholder of these foundations. There are 2 types of foundations. First, there are government-linked foundations, all related to advancing Bumiputra interests on behalf of the government. Why the government needs to set up foundations when it already has so many agencies, departments, and statutory bodies is unclear and deserves further questioning and research. Second, there are privately linked foundations. For our purpose today, we will look at the last 2 foundations, Tan Sri Muhyiddin Charity Golf Foundation and Yayasan Nurul Yakin. These foundations are privately linked to him. Tan Sri Muhyiddin Charity Golf Foundation was established in 2003 during Muhyiddin's tenure as Minister of Domestic Trade and Consumer Affairs. The board of directors includes his son Fakhri Yassin and his political allies such as Muhammad Saleh and Megat Najmuddin. Who are the donors to this foundation? As you can see, prominent companies such as Top Glove, prominent foundations such as Yayasan Al-Bukhari. Now, we do not have a complete list of the donors, but we do know for a fact that during an event in October 2019, Muhyiddin stated that this foundation has accumulated 27 million in donations since its inception in 2003, channeling approximately 24 million to charitable projects. If you look at the next slide, according to its official website, the foundation claims that it has made many charitable contributions. Again, we do not have a complete list of all the projects, but we do know for a fact that few contributions or plans may reflect a political agenda within the social cause, such as food donations to the community via Bersatu Hulu Selangor and Bersatu Lembah Pantai, a plan to build a dialysis center on a plot next to the Pago UMNO Division complex to cater to the needs of kidney patients in the constituency, in Muhyiddin's constituency. Much earlier, Yayasan Nurul Yakin was incorporated in 1991 during Muhyiddin's tenure as Chief Minister of Johor. It is managed by Muhyiddin's wife, Noraini. The board of directors includes Muhyiddin himself, his son Fakhri Yassin, and his brother Abdul Aziz. Apart from getting donations from prominent companies, they did obtain some form of grant from the Women's Ministry. The exact amount is unknown. Why? The absence of a stringent disclosure requirement has made it impossible to know who are the donors, the objectives behind these donations, or how much of these donations were actually used for charitable work. Next, we move on to the Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim. Okay. So not only the Prime Minister, even the current opposition leader, Anwar Ibrahim, is linked to a foundation. Anwar is linked to Yayasan Aman, incorporated in 1983 and currently helmed by Anwar's wife, Wan Aziza, and PKR Strategic Director, Saiful Izham. Who are the donors to this foundation? We don't know. And this foundation has never filed its annual report and financial reports since its incorporation, which is similar to Zahid's Yayasan Akal Budi. Ironically, the official website of this foundation claims that all cash donations made to it are tax exempted. Now, one of the criteria to qualify for tax exemption is to submit its annual report and financial reports to the Inland Revenue Board. So the question is, did it submit its financial reports to the IRB? Let's move on to the next slide. According to the official website and Facebook postings, this foundation claims that it has made many charitable contributions. Again, we do not have a complete list of all the projects, but we do know for a fact that few contributions may reflect a political agenda within the social cause, such as charitable contributions in Anwar's constituency in Port Dickson and Wan Aziza's constituency in Pandan. Now we shall discuss about the case studies. The first case study is on Najib Razak. He was Malaysia's 6th Prime Minister. As shown in the slide, Najib had served as chairman or trustee in numerous local charitable foundations. There are 3 types of foundations: government-linked, family-linked, and privately linked. Coming from a prominent political elite family, he had one family-linked foundation that had been around for decades, Noah Foundation. Like Muhyiddin, Najib also held positions in the government-linked foundations, promoting Bumiputra interests in his capacity as Prime Minister. However, Najib did something different. During the time as Prime Minister, he set up the infamous 1MDB, a sovereign wealth fund, which became a source of donations to foundations. For our purpose today, we will only look at 3 foundations which are allegedly linked to the 1MDB scandal: Yayasan 1MDB, Yayasan Raha, and Yayasan Rakyat Satu Malaysia. Now, Yayasan Raha, it was established in October 2000 in the name of Najib's mother. Among the directors of this foundation include Najib and his brothers. Who are the donors to Yayasan Raha? We don't know, but we know that it received 839,000 from 1MDB. This was based on the 1MDB forfeiture suit filed in June 2019 under the AMLA. The foundation settled the suit within 3 months. Meanwhile, Yayasan 1MDB was established in 2010. It is the social welfare arm of the government-owned 1MDB. It was entrusted with 100 million. However, it is interesting to note that this foundation have no records of registration with the CCM. Aside from donating to Yayasan Raha and Yayasan 1MDB, 1MDB also donated to Yayasan Rakyat Satu Malaysia. This is a privately linked foundation. It was established in January 2013, and board of directors include Najib himself and his closest allies such as Che Lodin, the former chairman of 1MDB, the late Azlin alias, Najib's former chief private secretary, and Wan Ahmad Shibab, former special officer to Najib. Now, during Najib's trial, a former CEO testified that the funders of this foundation were 1MDB and prominent companies such as Genting Group and Petronas. Sources of funding for donations is diverse. Here, it includes a sovereign wealth fund, 1MDB. Najib was chairman of the board, a large corporation, Genting, with close ties to Najib's family, and a government-linked company, Petronas, with high obligations to the state. All donors were intricately linked to Najib. On occasion, he had many executive decisions to channel funds for political reasons. So what do these foundations use the million of ringgit for? These foundations claim that they have made many charitable charitable contributions, which is true, but we did see some reflected a political agenda. For example, Yayasan Raha aids victims of disaster, especially in the Pekan district, which is Najib's constituency. Hajj candidates entitled for the Prime Minister's special Hajj programs sponsored by Yayasan 1MDB were allegedly nominated by UMNO chiefs. Yayasan Rakyat Satu Malaysia made heavy charitable contributions during the 13th general election in Penang, which is an important election battleground. It funded various social programs in Sarawak ahead of the Sarawak state election back in May 2016. These simple examples illustrates how foundations have been used as conduits to accumulate funds and channel the money to shore up political support among voters, among party chiefs and grassroots in hotly contested seats during the general elections and in an important state election. The second case study is on Zahid Hamidi. He's the former Deputy Prime Minister. The foundations controlled by or linked to him are as on the slide. Yayasan Gerak Bakti Kebangsaan is an UMNO-linked foundation, which Prof has mentioned just now. Now we will only look at two foundations which are allegedly linked to Zahid's criminal breach of trust case, currently ongoing in court, Yayasan Akal Budi and Yayasan Al-Falah. Zahid founded Yayasan Akal Budi in March 1997, 2 years after becoming a member of parliament. Who are the donors to this foundation? Unlike the prominent donors to foundations linked to Muhyiddin or Najib, donors to Zahid's foundations are relatively unknown businessmen and companies who allegedly donated to secure government contracts or projects. While Yayasan Akal Budi is a foundation closely linked to Zahid, Yayasan Al-Falah is a foundation chaired by Zahid's younger brother, Muhammad Nazir. It was registered with the ROS in April 2014 when Zahid was the Home Minister. Who are the donors to this foundation? Zahid himself in his personal capacity. It was revealed in court that 9.3 million was transferred out of Yayasan Akal Budi to Yayasan Al-Falah just 3 weeks after the Barisan Nasional lost power in the 2018 general election. Was there a political agenda behind the social programs of Yayasan Akal Budi? We don't think so. because although Yayasan Akal Budi's mandate was to provide welfare, especially for residents in Bagan Dato, including for mosques and Tafiq centers during Zahid's trial, the High Court was told that he had misappropriated approximately 31 million of Yayasan Akal Budi's funds without any money used to aid the poor. The money trail revealed that funds had been deployed to cover his personal expenses. This foundation, purportedly incorporated to eradicate poverty, is in fact a private company that has never conducted an audit, held any AGM, nor filed its financial reports with the CCM. The third case study is on Tengku Adnan, who was the former Minister of Federal Territories. Only two foundations that are linked to him, Yayasan Wilayah Persekutuan and Yayasan Al-Mansuria. Adnan was the chairman of Yayasan Wilayah Persekutuan, the welfare arm of the Federal Territories Ministry, because of its ministerial position. This foundation, incorporated to aid B40 citizens in the Federal Territories, is a private company limited by guarantee. As a private company, one way the foundation generates its own funding is through joint ventures with the private sector and land sales. These are the known joint venture partners. Property development projects which were expected to register profits of 138 million for the foundation. Now, who are the known donors? Who are the known donors to Yayasan Wilayah Persekutuan? Well-known companies, contractors, as well as Yayasan Al-Bukhari. Was there a political agenda behind the charitable activities? Only heavy charitable contributions in Putrajaya, which is an important election battleground for Adnan. Now, Adnan incorporated Yayasan Al-Mansuria in December 2000 when he was a senator in Dewan Negara. Who are the donors to this foundation? Such as Vincent Tan's Berjaya Corporation and some associations. Was there a political agenda behind the social programs of this foundation? According to the official website, the foundation claims that it has made many charitable contributions in Putrajaya, Adnan's constituency. It has funded the construction of, among others, Islam-centered schools and mosques in Labuan, Aceh, and Cambodia. Aceh and Cambodia are places where Adnan's private company, Tatman Sori Holdings, has business interests. The fourth case study is on Rosma Mansour. Although she's not a politician, she has a corruption case in court against her. She's the wife of former Prime Minister Najib Razak. She founded Yayasan Permata during Najib's administration. It was parked under the Prime Minister's department. It was launched in March 2011 with an initial capital of 4.4 million. Who are the known donors to this foundation? Prominent companies, GLCs, and foundations. It also received tremendous government allocation. The next slide is on Musa Aman, the fifth case study. He is the former Sabah Chief Minister and former chairman of Yayasan Sabah, which is a state-run foundation. The foundation is suing Musa for breach of fiduciary duty. The foundation statement of claim alleged that, among many, that Musa, as the then chief minister of the state and chairman of the foundation, engaged in an elaborate scheme for personal gain when defined areas within its concessions were systematically sold to selected timber companies determined by him. Some of these funds were then transferred to UMNO Sabah. The misuse of Yayasan Sabah is actually nothing new, which Professor will elaborate more later. The sixth case study is on Abdul Aziz Abdul Rahim. He is currently the Member of Parliament for Baling Kedah. He was elected as a chairman or trustee of numerous charitable foundations after venturing into politics. For our purpose today, we will only look at 3 foundations: Yapim, Yayasan Tabung Haji, and Club Putra Satu Malaysia. Yapim is a government-backed foundation which receives enormous goodwill assistance, especially from members of the public who participated in Yapim's salary deduction scheme. Aziz served as executive chairman of Yapim from as early as 2002. Yayasan Tabung Haji was established in May 2016 as the social welfare arm of the Pilgrims Fund Board. Aziz was the former chairman of Lembaga Tabung Haji as well as a trustee of this foundation. Club Putra One Malaysia, most likely a party-owned foundation, was founded by Aziz in 2010 and chaired by him. These 3 foundations carried out extensive social work, although their sources of funding is unclear. Was there a political agenda behind the social programs of these foundations? As you can see, for Yapim, some funds were allegedly used for election campaigning. Club Putra One Malaysia, heavy charitable contributions during a massive flood in Penang, which is an important election battleground. Yayasan Tabung Haji, 22 million were allegedly dispersed for politically linked activities. The last case study is on Nazaruddin. He is the former past deputy president. These are the foundations linked to him. Global Movement of Moderates Foundation was founded by Najib to promote moderation and to fight extremism. The foundation is neither registered as a company under the CCM nor as a non-profit organization under the ROS. So given the absence of a disclosure requirement, it is impossible to know which ministry the foundation was parked under. Whereas Yayasan Nazar is his private foundation. Now, Nazaruddin has claimed trial to 33 charges of money laundering and CBT involving these 2 foundations, amounting to 4 million. Funds were allegedly misappropriated to pay his and his family's personal expenses, and he has channeled to his private company, Wasatiyah Center for Peace. So I will pass now to Professor. Okay. Thank you.
Control for me, please. By now, you're completely overwhelmed with all the data, isn't it? I can see it in your faces. What's going on here? When is this going to stop? Well, here, let me now sense what's going on here. Can we have slides up, please? Sheraton, nothing. Yeah. Let's look at this. Now we start to make sense of these things. Najib Razak, right there at the top. What does he control? Different types of foundations. What you're seeing here, on one hand, the family-owned foundations, Noah Foundation, his grandfather, his mother, the other foundation named after his mother, family control. You can also see on the other side, the Yayasan R1M. Here, this is more a government-type foundation. And below, you can see Yayasan 1MDB. So different types of foundations are used by Najib, publicly owned as well as government-owned foundations. What you can see from here is the centrality of 1MDB channeling money into foundations to be done. Social work as well as political work. Take a note of the type of GLCs through his control of Ministry of Finance. Let's come down to the next one. I'll go through this. Look at the who is financing this too. Major groups, Genting as well as. Can we go to the next one, please? The next one is Zahid. Come on, the next one. The next one is Zahid. Completely different. A completely different way of using foundations. Here we are seeing two privately foundations. One is Akal Budi, unique to him. He alone controls the Yayasan Akal Budi. And then he creates. What you're also seeing is that the people that he is working with down there, the are not major companies. These are not companies that you have heard of. And these companies, according to the trial, what we are hearing from the testimonies were that these companies were giving donations to Zahid so that he, as Minister of Home Affairs, could in return contracts. This is all in the court testimony. You're seeing here now the Prime Minister has one style of using foundations. You're seeing here now the Deputy Prime Minister having a different way of using foundations. This is the multitude of different foundations. Next one, please. The multitude, how differently they are used. Now we come to Rosma, the Prime Minister's wife, no less. On one side, you see Najib using his position as Prime Minister to create a government-linked foundation which is under the control of Rosma. On the right, what you see is Jepak Holdings, where there are serious allegations of corruption, which channels money to Rosma. That's one thing which she's on trial for. But there's on the left here, the Yayasan, which also receives money from corporations, major corporations. So in this figure, what you're seeing is a multitude of things going on, which also clear examples of patronage, the distribution of contracts, kickbacks. This is what this figure is showing us. But what you also see at the bottom is Rizal Mansur, her private assistant, an UMNO man, who then creates his own Yayasan, creates his own foundation, so that he can use this foundation to raise funds for the UMNO youth elections. By his own admission, it was to raise funds so that he could take elections. That's why he set it up. Again, another different way in which foundations are being used. The next one, please. Now we come to the state level. If earlier I was talking about the federal level, now we are looking at the state level. Now Sabah Foundation, we need no introduction. Sabah Foundation has been around for a long time. Here is the point. Regardless who is the chief minister, it has been involved in corruption. And here what you're seeing is the allegations when Musa Aman was chief minister. And what was happening when Musa Aman had control of Yayasan Sabah. Here, through control of a state foundation, you see logging concessions. You see here on the left, proxies that were used. These are all allegations which came out in the court affidavits. Again, a completely different way of using foundations, this time at the state level. Come down, please. Trying here now to interpret, to show you all how the foundations are used and the different ways in which they are used. Now we come to Aziz, a prominent. Here, when we look at him, he has three different types of foundations. The government-linked foundations. In particular, I want to draw attention to Tabung Haji, Yayasan Tabung Haji, which is now allegedly involved in serious allegations of corruption. Then you come down, you have an UMNO-linked foundation, a party-linked foundation. And if you come further down, you see a privately linked foundation. Here, you're seeing an example of a politician owning different types of foundations and acting in different capacities, giving him control of different institutions also through these foundations. Can I see the last slide, please? The last one. The last one is, oh, they didn't put it up. Can we go back to this? Nasharuddin. We put up Nasharuddin because Nasharuddin is the only one here who's not from UMNO. Leave aside Musa. Musa is also state level. But Nasharuddin was linked to PAS. Now, I'm not saying there are any allegations here linking PAS to these foundations. But I am saying that here we have another example of a politician from a different party also having control to a government-linked foundation as well as a privately linked foundation. What do we do? How do we make sense of this? I would like to stress this. What we are showing you here is only the tip of the iceberg. Just like the GLCs. When we showed you the GLC world, it was only the tip of the iceberg. There's a serious lack of transparency and accountability in the use of foundations in the political system. There's no political will to expose of political financing. This is what is going on in the shadow world that I talked about, which creates this dark money that then enters into the political system, which then leads to the destabilization of parties as well as serious corruption in this country. So this is what we wanted to. The thing I would like to say is this. We would like to push the government now to table the Political Financing Act. We do know that the Political Financing Act is with the Attorney General's office. The Political Financing Act should be now put out in the public domain for us to review it, to see whether they can these foundations, the GLCs that I talked about. Does the Political Financing Act help to curb this kind of corruption that we are seeing? I'd like to end on this note, because today in Malaysia, as I speak, we are having serious problems about the issue of the pursuit of power. In the pursuit of power, we are seeing serious allegations of money being involved in party hopping. These are allegations. Where is all this money coming from also for these allegations which we are told of for this party hopping that we are seeing happening in this country? We have to put a stop to the serious monetization of politics. And we have to put a stop to these covert forms, third-party actors that are being used. Covertly, you can see them, they're out there, but covertly being used to finance political parties and their political activities. Thank you. We are now open this up for the next stage for the Q&A.
Thank you, Prof. Terence and Lalita. We have now come to the commentary and question and answer segment of the event. For members of the media, kindly raise your hands and our crew will pass our microphone to you. Please state your name and the name of your publication before asking your question. To our viewers online, please, if you're on Zoom, use the Q&A box, and if you are watching from Facebook or YouTube, please comment in this below the video. To moderate this segment, please welcome Azrul Muhammad Khalib, C4 Center board member, onto the stage.
Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good morning. Welcome to all of you once again for joining us at this morning's event of this launch of this particularly important report. We've heard quite a lot of startling findings this morning, and certainly there's going to be quite a number of questions that are going to be put forward by the members of the audience who are attending here in this hall, as well as those online. I would like to just, before we begin the commentary, just mention that because we've already introduced most of the speakers here, we have one additional person that's joining us for this panel, is Yang Berhormat Hanayo, who is, as you know, the former Deputy Minister of Women, Family and Community Development, and is also a Member of Parliament of Segambut. So welcome, YB. So we'll go straight to it. We will go straight to the commentary and Q&A segment. So we're going to go in a little bit of a interactive mode. So I do hope all of our speakers are ready. Prof. Terence mentioned just now about the tip of the iceberg, and this is something that we have known for quite a while. It seems, though, that it's been normalized, that this iceberg, though we keep talking about it, seems to be either growing bigger, but also unaddressed. If I could ask Prof. Terence to respond, how else do you think that political parties in Malaysia should be able to fundraise for the benefit of their parties? Is it through subscription fees that these party members are paying? I mean, what alternative model is there, seeing how you are implying that the current model today is flawed and even one that is arguably illegal? Go ahead, Prof.
Thank you. In 2008, after we had the momentous general election when 5 state governments fell and the Barisan Nasional lost its 2/3 majority for the first time, we proposed a political financing act. And in that political financing act that we proposed, we talked about alternative sources of funding for political parties. Let me be very clear. Our aim was to help political parties to raise funds legitimately. Let me be very clear. We recognize the importance of political parties. We need to support political parties. But how can we support them? By channeling the funds that they require for their voluminous amount of political activities. And they have a lot of political activities to pay for. So we were proposing, we did a study where we looked at a number of countries, and we were looking at state financing, government financing of political parties based also on the number of seats that they have. We felt that this system will also be more open. We did not want to stop donations from the private sector and from private individuals. But we did say there must be a cap. We put a cap to how much they can donate so that we don't have this kind of political influencing that is happening. We didn't want the problem of state capture, where if you donate a lot of money, they come to power and then they begin to shape policies to suit the interest of the donors. We also said that we'll create a mechanism where if a donor does not want to be disclosed, we will find a mechanism to keep the donation, the donor's identity will not be put in the public domain. And we suggested institutions such as the Election Commission playing that role. Not the Ministry of Home Affairs, the Election Commission. Why did we say that? Because when we tabled this motion for political finance, for this Political Financing Act to the opposition told us at that time they are not going to support it. Why? I'm talking now 2008, when the opposition, Pakatan, had now secured control of 5 state governments, as well as secured a huge presence in parliament.
Let's hold on to that first, Prof, because I needed you to respond to that question, simply to put into context what we need to respond to, especially since the report is quite a significant one that outlines quite a lot of the current practice of political financing in the country. And having heard what you've said, I would like to invite YB Hana to respond to what he just said just now, but also to give your own comments concerning the report that's just been launched this morning. Please, go ahead, YB.
Thank you. I'll just give my comment to the report that was presented just now. Looking at the yayasans involved and the personalities involved, these are very powerful lawmakers, cabinet members, prime minister, deputy prime minister. It makes no sense for the top two, prime minister, deputy prime minister, I'm talking about Zahid and Najib, having access to taxpayers' money, having full power at cabinet to fix the welfare problem, to help the poor. These are the highest individual in the cabinet or among the 222 MPs to fix the problem. So this is definitely, I think, a tool for them to not want to fix that problem because they have access to the structure and the system. If they want to fix it, it would have been done on Wednesday at the cabinet meeting. There is no need to form yayasans, to fix welfare or even to fix religious issues, okay? The other thing I want to share with you is my experience dealing with Yayasan Wilayah Persekutuan. When I came into Kuala Lumpur, and we won, and we had to fight the Taman Rimba Kiara case involving Yayasan Wilayah Persekutuan. And we have a new FT minister called Khalid Samad, who inherited Tengku Anand's problem. When I went to Khalid Samad, and I said, you have to fix this, you have to reform Yayasan Wilayah Persekutuan, or to do away with it, because you have other avenues to fix the problem, right? The entire purpose of having a yayasan is to do welfare in Kuala Lumpur. And his reply to me was, if other chief ministers can have their yayasan, why can't I have a yayasan in Kuala Lumpur? So just because others are having a yayasan, it does not mean that you need to have a yayasan. And that to me is the problem. People see this as, I don't know, a pride or, you know, a crown, the fact that you have a yayasan doing welfare in your state. I just cannot understand that. And so I have realized in my battle to preserve Taman Rimba Kiara, I received very little support except from the people themselves who voted me in, and C4. People like Ambiga stood by my side in that 22 months battling Taman Rimba Kiara. And when I went to MACC, I went with C4 and the residents. And MACC looked at me completely toothless. They said that there's nothing we can do about this. That really shattered, I think, my confidence in wanting to preserve green space, wanting to fight corruption, and wanting to convince my own colleagues that you need to reform this. And today, I'm so thankful that when we went to Court of Appeal, and the Court of Appeal agreed with everything that we've been saying, that there is conflict of interest, there was great sense of vindication, as though somebody finally heard us. And our lawyers were in tears because, you know, we had to fight a huge, it's a monster. I don't even know where else to find help to fight something as simple as this. This is just one example of personal experience dealing with Yayasan Wilayah Persekutuan. I am glad there were improvements made, I think, in the last 22 months. When we went to the Public Accounts Committee, PAC agreed to take this up. PAC tabled a report and confirmed that there was indeed conflict of interest. So we do see the select committees having a role coming into play, checking on things. So to me, I think that's progress, but we need to do more. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is in my reading of the PAC report, PAC made it very clear that a yayasan like Yayasan Wilayah Persekutuan needs to be answerable. If you're going to deal with assets involving, you know, land deals for welfare purpose in Kuala Lumpur, PAC said that they need to be turned into a statutory body answerable to Parliament, right? At the moment, it's a private company and it does not come under the scrutiny of National Audit Department. And I remember when I was fighting this Yayasan Wilayah Persekutuan, the answer given to me is, don't you want school bags for your residents, poor residents in Segambut? If you want school bags, if you want uniforms, if you want to help the poor in your area, then you've got to support their effort. These deals have to happen because we need money for welfare. But when I turn up in these areas, you'll find that poor students, they have been given 5 to 6 school bags from various yayasan and various organizations. All these school bags have their, you know, logo printed on it, and there is no dignity for the poor. You don't expect a child to go to school knowing that this person's school bag, the child's school bag, has been donated by a yayasan, and, you know, 6 other children, 10 other children having the same school bag with the same logo. It makes no sense. So obviously this is a system meant to feed the ego of those who are giving and not to help those who are receiving. The other thing I've experienced, one of the slides just now, a grant from the Women Ministry, right? I think it was Muhyiddin's Yayasan or Najib's Yayasan. I remember when we were I was appointed as Deputy Minister, and I looked at the budget, and there was a fund passed by Parliament for NGOs to apply for welfare purpose. I think it was about 20 million, if I'm not mistaken. And so I began to ask my ministry, I say, I want to know who decides on how much to give to all these NGOs. I want to sit in that committee. Because I have so many requests from NGOs asking me to attend their events, and when I turn up, I don't have allocation to give to these NGOs. I've only been given 500,000 as a Deputy Minister to distribute when I attend programs. And, you know, welfare, you have so many different welfare NGOs. The answer given to me is, we do not want interference by any politician, so as a Deputy Minister, I could not sit in a committee like that to decide on which NGO receive funding. So you know, it's hard for me to even tell NGOs, I actually don't have a say. Even as a Deputy Minister, I have no access to that committee. Okay, so it's entirely controlled by the civil service. And that's why this cartel, civil service, I think, you know, in their good intention to keep away politicians, it also means that people who are elected to come and bring reform have no access to the same system that I'm meant to fix. The second one is, we also have a grant given to government agencies to set up childcare centers. You know, 10 million in 2019, 2020 we had about 30 million. So I say, I want to sit in that committee because I want to decide whether it's the police station or hospital Kuala Lumpur, you know, which government agency deserve more funding for such a grant. Again, I was told, you cannot sit in this committee. I will tell you, the civil servants then gave me a list of the agencies they approved. So people like me, with every good intention to fix the system, when I entered Putrajaya, I'm not given access for something as simple as that, childcare grant and grant for NGOs. The other thing I want to talk about is political financing. Recently, I did an online crowdfunding for my office. As opposition, now we have no allocation. We're only given 100,000, right? And when I had to do an online fundraising, people just donated. Residents, people from everywhere donated. I look around me and I ask myself, how come others don't have to do this? Where are their money coming from? If I have to pay 30,000 a month to pay salary for my staff, to rent office, what about the rest? I've heard from other genuinely struggling politicians. I have friends, MPs from Sabah. MPs from Sabah told me without allocation, they just can't function. Yeah. They cannot function because even if you were to turn to your people for fundraising, they don't have the means to help you. So in Kuala Lumpur, it's a bit easier, but in Kota Belud, it's difficult, it's challenging. And that's why we have to look at the entire issue of political financing. It has everything to do with the defection today. Because you just cannot expect rural MPs to function on ideals alone. I mean, you can go to rallies and tell the poor, this is how I'm going to fix your problem. But what they want is they want infra. I want a bridge here, I want a road here. But if they have no way to fundraise and to fix the people's problem, they will be voted out, they will not be chosen. And so these defections continue to happen. So that's something very important. I think if you want to fix defection, we have to fix political financing. The other thing I want to talk about is allocation currently given by ICU. Every MP, if you are from government MP, you get about 3.5 million for your constituency. If you're opposition, you get 100,000. Now, the money is not banked into my account. I have to apply to ICU. ICU is parked under the Prime Minister's department. So in our 22 months, even though I went to Guan Eng, Ministry of Finance, I said, please help me fix this problem. MOF couldn't do anything because it's parked under PMO, right? And this allocation is very strange. The money is there, but they have their rules. So for example, if I want to build an outdoor gym, I apply to ICU and I say, I would like an outdoor gym set to be built in this residential area. ICU will decide on the contractor. I cannot decide on the contractor. And these are Bumi Putra status contractors. And the pricing, I don't have a say. Okay? So when I look at that, I highlighted this at all the MPs meeting. I said we have to fix this. To build 2 outdoor gym set using ICU pricing, it's 17,000 ringgit for 2 sets. Okay? But if I turn to private contractors and I say, please give me 3 quotes, I want to know, they can give me 3 sets of gym set, an additional gym set for only 11,000 ringgit. That's almost half, 50% discount, right? And if this is just gym set, you imagine the other tenders, how much wastages in the name of empowering Bumiputra contractors. I dare say that outside there are many, many competitive, competent Bumiputra contractors who have every means to do the same work, but they have no access to that system. How are you listed? You know, so that's one. The other thing that I find it very strange now is, if I have 100,000 now, if I want to give out kurma, because Ramadan is coming, I want to give dates to the mosque. I want to buy the kurma. By right, I should be able to buy from Maidin, for example, and just submit my receipt. Here's the receipt for 5,000 kurma. I cannot claim. ICU tells me that you have to form an NGO for you to claim. And so I asked around, and everybody says, you know, just go and form an NGO, because ICU needs to pay an NGO for them to reimburse you. I said, I don't want to form an NGO. I have enough work on my hand. I don't want to run an AGM every year, and I don't want to have an extra entity for me to run. But that's how they have been functioning. And so somebody like me, if I want to buy dates, I want to buy something simple like kurma, I have to knock on doors of residents association and say, would you allow me to claim through you, residents association, so that I don't have to go and find money to pay for kurma, you know? So the system is meant to frustrate those who really want to do good. And this is my conclusion. My conclusion is, for Malaysians out there who are listening and to anyone who wants to fight corruption, every time you hit the wall with a grey policy, an area that is grey, you don't know how to apply, you don't know what's the process, you don't know why this policy is created to make life so difficult, that is the room that breeds corruption. And that is the space that we need to change. As simple as ICU allocation. And to end with this, I think MACC now really has to show to Malaysians, if they are serious about wanting to fight corruption, MACC should stand alongside people like C4 and push for the political financing bill to be tabled. I think MACC will be judged based on this. Thank you.
So there's been quite a number of points that you raised there that I really want to be able to respond to, as well as get our panelists to also take some questions. But seeing how you're, well, fortunately or unfortunately, you're the only politician on stage that we have this morning, perhaps you could respond to this. A lot of what you described just now is really about conflict of interest. You know, there's mechanisms that are being put into place to separate the politicians from basically the decision makers for which allocations are being provided. Isn't that a good thing? Because from where we're seeing right now, a lot of politicians do not even understand the concept of conflict of interest. So I challenge you, isn't that good that you are not deciding for...
Yes, I think it's very good, provided you have a truly independent civil service. The fact that today civil servants are being brought to court because there's a cartel involved, it shows to you that over the years, you need to find a system to also check on the civil service, right? The ideal situation is for politicians to be kept outside of this.
Sure.
But you have to ensure to me that the system is foolproof. But if I have, as the deputy minister, I don't know which yayasan is receiving what grant, how am I going to bring reform? I cannot bring any reform.
Okay, so basically you as a politician there, you're seeing a situation where your hands are also tied, even when you are part of the system or part of the government as you were in the previous government. Okay, this is a really interesting admission here. Let me get a response concerning the issue of the Bukit Kiara Taman, and I will get it from Lalita, I think, and C4 in this case. It's been raised by YB Hana just now concerning that particular incident, and Khalid Samad was mentioned. So I want to ask you, seeing how you've done the research, and this is a question from Malaysia Kini, who's asking whether there was any kind of influence that was given through political donations that were being done through those yayasan, and did it influence people like Khalid Samad when it came to the Bukit Kiara case? Lalita? From your research.
Okay. I think this question is best answered by YB Henayu because she had more dealings with YB Khalid Samad on this issue. As far as I'm concerned, I just did the research and to see whether there's a conflict of interest involving Tengku Adnan.
Was there?
It seems like that, yes, it was. We have submitted all the proof and the evidence to MACC, and we're just not sure why they never acted on it. But I suppose best for YB Hannah to comment on this.
I don't know about Khalid Samad's political financing. I think you have to ask Khalid Samad.
Okay, so let's put that question also concerning the issue of the deforestation, the Kuala Langat deforestation issue. Do you think that political financing played a role for the Selangor MP's decisions concerning that particular issue? Cynthia?
Does this work?
Yes, it works.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Unfortunately, we haven't done any in-depth investigation on this issue to comment, so it will not be fair. But we are part of that coalition that is looking into several issues, mainly on environmental destruction, climate change, and whether there's any suspicion in relation to the companies that were awarded the project. But I think it would be safe not to say too much at this point until we get further information. But may I just say something in comment to YB Hana? Because it really is very interesting, and it makes very interesting insights and knowledge to actually hear how it works internally. And there's certainly things that we hope we're not coming across as being too idealistic, but real in terms of facing the problem. So one of the issues really, if I may sound a bit critical, I hope there won't be any offense taken, is the whole issue of allocations to MPs. Opposition MPs have always suffered this issue of discrimination when it comes to allocations. But it was also rather disappointing that in the 22 months in power, Pakatan Harapan was also practicing similar approaches about denying opposition MPs that same amount of allocation. So would it be something that you would help us advocate that all MPs should be given a fair allocation, and that needs to be legislated properly so that it's not at the whims and fancies of the government, you just get 100,000 or 500,000, but it is something that is rightfully what is given to every member of parliament. So it's not about voting, oh, if I vote opposition, then I can't get a road built for me or a bridge built for me, etc. So when Larry Sung made that excuse that he actually hopped because he didn't have enough allocations, it made it all the more serious that it needed to be legislated. So if Pakatan Harapan wins GE15 again, will that be something really important, that it will not be an issue of discrimination because every MP is and should be given the same amount of allocations, whether it's an urban constituency or a semi-rural constituency, that they need to do their job. And whether that is something, I'd like to hear from Hannah and every other politician, because this is something quite important for political financing reform.
Okay, Cynthia, but let me just add on to that, because this is very important, because we have to be realistic, right? Is that, we heard just now from YB Hannah that, if you're a government MP, you get 3.5 million, and if you're opposition, you get 100K. And that's a huge disparity, and it affects the way you're able to deliver service, but it also breeds dependency, in which you actually have to depend on, being supportive of the government, and it sort of rewards and punishes people who are the constituents who vote for a particular, member of parliament or wakil rakyat and so forth. So the question that really needs to be asked is, what is the best interest or the interest of the government or the political parties in power at that point of time to enact the reform that we're talking about here? Pakistan Harapan didn't do it. So who are we going to hope for in the next election to be able to put in these reforms? Because it's self-serving, right? They don't want to change. YB Hannah.
Pakatan Harapan did a little bit, which is to give 100,000 to opposition. And obviously now, it has come back to bite ourselves. Obviously, 100,000 is not enough. I think the basic minimum is to ensure that office and salaries of their staff are paid. Forget about developmental grant, but basic operations of office to make sure that you do not have people lobbying at the MP's office, in exchange, if I'm going to pay salary for your staff this month, then you help me approve this license.
What prevented Pakatan Harapan, when it was in power, from doing more than just 100K? Why not parity? Like what the government MPs receive is also received by the opposition MPs.
I'm not part of the cabinet, so the actual reason I don't know, but based on what I hear is the fact that somebody like Najib and Zahid already have so much money. Do you want to give them more money? Wow. And so let's start with 100,000. So that's one. The other thing is, I feel that there must be an acknowledgement that there are areas that we failed to reform, and allocation is definitely one of them. And today, Harapan is paying the price through defections. Because this is something that our own people are struggling with, and they just cannot sustain this path anymore, and that's why they hop. Of course, people make comparison, or Larry shouldn't have said that, because if Hannah can do fundraising in Kuala Lumpur, surely Larry can do the same in Sarawak. But like how I explained, I'm not trying to justify defection.
Okay.
But the reality in the rural area is really difficult. I've seen MPs, my colleagues, who told me, even to give bags of rice, they can't even ask for donation, because the residents will scold her and say, when you come in, you are expected to help us, not ask us to give you donation. So at the end of the day, federal government, whoever the federal government is, when you deny a constituency of allocation, you're not denying the politician, you're actually denying the taxpayers. And so taxpayers then, if you are going to punish Segambut taxpayers by giving them only 100,000, maybe the Segambut taxpayers should not pay so much tax to the federal government. Opposition seats don't have to pay so much tax. The same ratio you gave, the same ratio we can give back. So that's something I think the federal government really needs to pay attention.
We should relocate to your kawasan, YB. Okay, so let me go on to the next question. We have a question here from, anonymous at BN, Pakatan Harapan or Perikatan Nasional. There's been constant cartels, money laundering. So the question here, and this is being a little bit skeptical or cynical really, is that even if the bill, the political finance bill that we've been talking about this morning, actually gets passed in Parliament, will there actually be, political will to actually enforce? Will there actually be movement by MECC, for example, to actually enforce the legislation that has been passed? I put this to Prof. Terence. Go ahead.
I listened with great interest to what Hannah was saying, and I'd like to quote Hannah on her last point. She said, members of her coalition said, if we give allocations to the politicians equally, Najib and Zahid, for example, already having lots of money, so why give them more? I'd like to come back now to the point that I was, when Azrul cut me off earlier when I started speaking. Thank you for doing that. Thank you. No, you had to, yes, because it gave me a chance now to hear from Hannah. Here's the point. In 2008, when we first had the opportunity to put this in motion, introduce legislation on political financing to clean up the system, those were the same words that were told to me. We now, in the opposition, are getting some money. Why do we want to draw a line here now? Because we're only going to cut off the funding that's coming to us. Yeah. While those people already have so much money. That was what was told to me. We are now in 2021, and look at where we are today. And the same arguments are being made. This is why I totally agree with Hannah. The time has come. Enough is enough. Bring in the Political Financing Act. But I agree totally with what Azrul just said. There is no political will on the part of both sides to support this. I'm happy to hear what Hannah is saying. Hannah may be among the few honorable politicians that we have left. I'm saying the few because Hannah has been supportive of this. Thank you, Hannah. But I have personally encountered people from both sides who have shown to me very clearly there's no will. So where does that leave us? This is why a campaign like this today is important. It has to come from the public. The public has to now, NGOs have to stand up, the public has to stand up, and I like the last question, to form a movement to force the politicians to say enough is enough. You saw the voluminous evidence that we gave you today. You saw the stupendous amount of money that's being poured into the system. Where is this money coming from? And I'll say enough is enough. Can I close on this point? Because today we have an economic crisis. When we had the global pandemic, which affected the economy, what it meant was all private firms had to close down. What did the government say? We will use the government ecosystem to solve this problem, to help the economy. What was this government ecosystem about? The GLCs. The GLCs were supposed to be the mechanism through which we will save the economy. Fortunately for us, we had a GLC system that could help us save the economy. But instead, it has become a tool now, again, for political financing. So even when we have a crisis and when we need to use our scarce resources carefully, it is not being used. What did they do with the GLC system? They appointed politicians to be directors of the GLCs so that they could get stipends which would then go into the financing of their own political activities. This is where we are now. So that's why the act is extremely important.
Before, you want to respond specifically to his point? Or
Yeah.
you bring up an issue?
A little bit and add to something else.
Okay, go ahead.
No, well, I just wanted to say that this whole work towards the reform of political financing is a very critical one, something that's very needed, but it is not going to eliminate corruption in its entirety because it's very, very complex and very sophisticated. But we also have, you know, maybe funny, amusing things that could get us moving. And you never know how things could work in Parliament these days, when even a convicted felon, a former Prime Minister himself, who's convicted of money laundering and corruption charges, is appearing to speak about democracy and talking about political funding and how we need a political financing act. Funny as it may sound, it may be something that should be tabled now as a campaign before GE15. And I think if and when Parliament ever does get to convene, it would be something very important for the Malaysian public to galvanize the momentum around this, that we need more Hanayos in Parliament. We need people with integrity, dignity, and to price transparency into the whole system about how MPs get their money, about political allocations. And the other thing that troubled me about what Hannah shared was ICU insisting that they only can pay money to an NGO. And that actually clouds the whole NGO landscape, because from the time politicians started to create NGOs, that actually clouded our independent work as well. So which NGOs are independent, which are not, which are the ones that are actually serving political parties and so on. It elevates the problems into different levels, but it definitely needs transparency around who and what are being funded by political parties.
Which ones are truly non-government organizations as opposed to gongos, right? Government-organized, non-government organizations.
Exactly.
So let me park that issue for a bit, because that's quite important, that last part that you mentioned just now. We have a question here on the Slido, which is that in order for anti-corruption to work, in order for this issue of political financing to also work, it depends on a crucial figure or figures that need to be protected, and that is the whistleblower. And we seemingly have not done enough to strengthen the protections for the whistleblower, and in fact, it's considered a weak law, the legislation that currently is in place. And we see that whistleblowers are in fact persecuted once there is the existence of that person, coming out, and the government or the political parties involved start hunting for the person, and there's no protection whatsoever for them. And there is a disincentive to even want to come forward and be that person to share this information. So you've worked on this issue for quite a long time in terms of anti-corruption. I mean, what kind of recommendations would you put forward for the political parties, but also the government, to consider in terms of strengthening the issue of whistleblower protection?
Well, yes, I think all of us on this panel have had different experiences of whistleblowing, and we know the repercussions are pretty serious when it comes to blowing the whistle. In fact, a lawyer friend on the floor today, now, right after I said something in my opening speech, he said, "Oh my God, I'm sorry, but I think what you said sounded seditious." So I was like, oh, which line? What did I say? And then after that, the report got presented, and that looked even more seditious and more telling. But here is the point. We've been championing whistleblower protection for the longest time, and we know it needs protection, but where do we actually start first? Do we push towards political financing reform, whistleblower protection? Do we do everything together? There was a lot that we were counting on in the Buku Manifesto, because, I mean, although that's really history, it's something to bring back for GE15, that 21 of the 60 promises in the Buku Manifesto were about protecting whistleblowers, highlighting corruption, because if you cannot even speak about it, what is the point about talking of all these grand legislative reforms, etc., around, say, independent institutions, political financing, asset declaration, etc. The role of the citizen, the role of Malaysians have to be enhanced. So it's not about making uncalled for statements or defamatory statements, but it's about empowering someone who wants to complain to have that enabling environment that they will not face reprisals. In this country, after all the things that we've been through, it's like only Bodo people, it's like people who got nothing better to do, want to go to jail, face lawsuits, etc., would do this. But this, in essence, is actually the most important work. It's about calling out people in power. It's about speaking truth to power, and that needs protection.
But Cynthia, you're saying that after years of experience working in this field, how does the average person link what those big, large crimes are in terms of their everyday life? I mean, they look at bread and butter issues. How do they view these things? In order for us to get them on board, they have to understand. And we know that it does affect but can they see these issues affecting their daily lives? I mean, let me ask Lalita, I mean, what do you think? Do you think the everyday person, the average person understands these, corruption issues? In order to get them on board, what should we do better?
Well, to the grassroots levels, especially like those who are involved in distributing food and drinks and school bags, they don't care where the money comes from, as long as they get some allocation to do their charity work to help the poor. So if you go to areas like PPR, okay, they are like mothers, single mothers, who needs the money. And when they are given food and drinks, like food bank, for example, they don't question where this money comes from.
Yeah.
So we are dealing with two levels of people. Those who are high, who wants to know where is this coming, where is the source of funds? How is these funds are being distributed? Are they politically linked? But those at the grassroots, they just want some money or some food to survive. So I don't think the message is being sent to them that, look, you are not supposed to take this food or drink because it may not be halal, or it came from an illegal source or dark money. So that's...
Okay. I mean, this is real. I mean, this is what we see every day. And I want to ask YB Hana on this. We saw recently a video of a politician handing out 50 ringgit notes while visiting a row of stalls, and he claims to want to tap out the food later on, but it looks very suspicious. But this is the culture that has been normalized now. You wouldn't see it necessarily in other more mature democracies, that somebody just hands out money. But here it's accepted. Here somebody has a wedding, kanuri kawin, or there is expectation that the MP gives some sort of donation of sumbangan, in the case of a death or somebody wanting to do a akikah even, potong jambol and all that. So how do we change this phenomena? How do we, people are looking at bread butter issues, and here we are talking about the big picture issues. How do we get them on board to support these issues? I mean, you're an MP, so you talk to the people. You know their hearts best. How do we convince them? YB?
I don't know. I'm still trying to find out. Just Taman Rimba Kiara alone, trying to explain why using a park to do welfare is not the right thing to do. And even then, it takes so much of explanation because, in our battle, so many other things were thrown at us. And when you are in a culture of politicians playing up race and religion, anything you say is then
Twisted,
because this involved the Indian groups, or because this involved Islam. So it's very difficult, I think, for us to change some of this mindset. And it's going to take time. It's going to take time for us to not be able to give anything to our constituency, and for them to vote for you based purely on policy and not what you can give them. That is going to take time.
Yeah. Prof. Terence, you look like you want to respond. I mean, you're holding back. Here, go ahead. I'll give you a chance there.
I do want to respond because Hannah said she's not sure how to deal with this. And I totally agree with what Lalita said. We are not, when we talk about the poor, I want to make a distinction between the poor and the middle class. When we talk about the poor, they are worrying about their daily lives. But what we're doing here today, I'm addressing to the middle class, I'm addressing to the media. These are the institutions that can play this role in terms of publicizing what we are trying to show here today. The thing here is, you asked, how do we make this known? Read the report. The report is written in a very simple style. Even the middle class will find it very difficult to understand some of these political machinations, these covert business political links that we are seeing here. We simplified it as much as we could so that the middle class can understand. Even those who are not in the middle class can also understand. It's a process of education. And once they're informed, we break down all these complex things into very simple form, then they are aware about what's happening. Second, we need the media, as I said. The media has to play a role in helping us bring a stop to this. And that's when the message gets out. So I think we have done our part. We have done our part, we've done the research. Now we have even simplified it. We've made the report as simple as possible. Now it goes on to the media. And that's when the pressure mounts on the politicians, because everyone is now focusing attention on this.
So, I deliberately wanted to take this approach of a bottom-up, meaning we talk about people and we talk about wanting to change what's on top. So I want to just, in our final few minutes, to go to the top, which is the government. There is throughout our entire conversation this morning, basically an acceptance that there is a culture of corruption in government. We've been hearing over the past couple of weeks the news about cartels, about what sounds like systematic and institutionalized practices which are akin to corruption. So obviously there is a need to reform government itself. So I have a question here from Slido here is, how can we work towards eliminating the culture of corruption in government? And that's a big question to ask, and it's a big premise to accept. So where can we start? Perhaps before I go to YB Hana, I'll ask Prof. Teo. Go ahead.
Thank you. That question is relevant because it speaks to what Cynthia just said.
Yeah.
Cynthia earlier said, coming up with an act is not enough. I totally agree. We need to have institutional reforms, devolution of power, checks and balances in the system. Unfortunately, I feel that this didn't occur even under Pakatan, although they may say they had these institutional reforms. I didn't see that being embedded. There must be a distinction between, say, the Prime Minister's office and the AG's office. The AG, the MACC, when they file the report, goes up to the AG. They have said the problem lies with the AG. I agree. The AG advises the government. What we need to do is to have institutional reforms where we have a public prosecutor's office. So there's a distinction between the AG who advises the government and a public prosecutor's office which has got nothing to do with the executive arm of government. So these kinds of serious institutional reforms have not been put in place. And that's what we have to start with. Then we can start moving to real, we do have cases of arrest, but it's selective prosecution. We want to make sure that it's really across the border without fear or favor. For that, we need a truly independent, everyone.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so let me just hold on to that question for a bit. Let me ask if there are any questions from the media here. If you do have, please, is there a mic? There's a mic here. You could just, media please, for the moment. Oh, I forgot, the media tables at the back there. It's all clustered there. Cluster media. Go ahead. Thanks.
Hi. Shannon from the Straits Times. Basic, kind of technical question. Just wondering why you feel politicians or political parties, whoever these players might be, why do they use foundations? I just want that basic question instead of other various methods. The reason I'm is because register your foundation as a society under ROS or as a company under CCM. Don't they fall under the same rules that a normal company, a normal society would have to undergo? But we are hearing in the report, some of them have never filed financial reports for their entire existence. Are they getting away with something that normal companies?
Okay, cool. Are there any other questions from the media at the back? We'll take a few. Any additional questions? No? The media are shy this morning. There's a question in the front. If you could just bring the mic over, Andrew.
Good morning. My question is about the recent amendment to the emergency ordinance to insert sections 10A and 10B, which basically deal with financial issues. I think the press has covered a lot about 10A, which is the ability to spend. But I want to focus on 10B, which is where two provisions in two different laws, which required the approval of the Dewan Rakyat to transfer money that had been raised from government funding, either through Sharia principles or through the issue of treasury bills, to transfer the proceeds of that into the development fund, under law requires the approval of the Dewan Rakyat. With the amendment, that approval is no longer required. So the question is, why has that approval been removed? Is it simply because the Dewan Rakyat is not meeting, or is there a worse reason for that? So that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Thomas from Brussels. My question is that, first of all, I just want to thank C4 for the excellent report and revelation of another way that politicians use to hide their money and also to extract money from the system. My question is that I was looking through the report, but I did not see any recommendation. Obviously, foundation, your spotlight now is on foundation. But what are your recommendations to deal with this issue? What are the amendments in law that need to be amended so that we can deal with this problem should there be a political will one day?
So there are a couple of questions there. So I will start first with YB Hana. There's that question concerning why foundations. But it's okay, go ahead, because you're a politician.
I really don't know why they prefer foundation, but maybe foundations sounds a lot more elegant, a lot more
Harmless.
grand, a lot more noble, I think. And so maybe people won't question because it's a foundation. Yeah, it sounds more noble, I think. The other question that Andrew had about why did they do away with that consent, I think for simple reason, because Dewan Rakyat is not meeting, and we don't know how long this is going to go for. Usually when you have something like that, then the legal officers will then look through every provision that requires consent of Dewan Rakyat, and then they will put that into the ordinance. Yeah.
Why the use of foundations? I mean, that's what YB Hana said just now, but from your research, why are they using foundations?
Okay, because for foundations, let's say if you're registered under the ROS, the rules are not so strict. They do have rules in place. For example, if it's a welfare-based organization, then it's not supposed to be receiving political donations or contributions. It's not supposed to be carrying out activities that are politically linked. But where is the check and balance? Who is checking on them on a regular basis? So I'm not accusing corruption or anything, but I'm saying there are loopholes. Unlike if a company is registered as a public listed company, then you have very stringent rules that you have to submit, a very detailed profit and loss, balance sheet, and so on. But it's not the case for companies that are foundations that are registered under ROS, which is why, for example, you have Zahid's Yayasan Akal Budi, and as you've seen in this case, Anwar's Yayasan Aman, they don't have financial records. You can't see their financial records since incorporation, which was way back in the 1980s, in the CCM, nothing, blank. So we don't know the source of funds. We don't know how much they are spending, nothing, no movement in the balance sheet or in the P&L, okay? The other point I wanted to stress is also our Inland Revenue Board. When the foundations, they apply, okay, for tax exemption status, Of course, there are a lot of criteria that they need to fulfill. And one of them is to submit the foundation's financial report and annual report. But as you've seen in Yayasan Aman's case, they have never submitted to CCM. So we as the public, we don't know whether they did submit to IRB or they were given a special exemption. There's no need for them to submit.
Okay.
So we as the public, we are lacking all this information.
So basically, we're looking at foundations being black holes that people can just even launder money, basically, for whatever
Exactly.
purpose, and with there being very little transparency in these foundations.
Yes, there's
Okay.
hardly any transparency.
So that's an important point there. And I wanted to just go to Cynthia before we wrap up, and I have final last words from each of you. The point just now concerning the report not having recommendations, could you respond to that, please, Cynthia? Go ahead.
Yes, we discussed that internally actually about whether we wanted to add in a whole section on recommendations, but we felt the revelations itself, the findings itself needed to be the focus. And we will be probably coming up with a second series of institutionalized type of very detailed reforms of what may be needed, and more in-depth studies into NGOs, yayasans, and charities. Because the last, and among the one or two things I wanted to say, is that for all of us present here, and online, I thought the questions were really interesting online, is that the entire world of corruption, and Hannah had said so clearly, for those of us who want to push this whole agenda of fighting corruption, we first of all need to see that it's gotten so complex and so sophisticated that it isn't just about yayasans. Today is a finding about yayasans, something we have missed. We've been talking about government-linked companies, we've been talking about the whole pursuit of political power through money and money politics. But yayasans are something that, you know, it just escapes you because you don't really need to report so directly to the Registrar of Societies or the Companies Commission. Some things we found aren't even registered, but they're getting millions of funds anyway to administer works. But my point here is this. Apart from yayasans, government-linked companies that Prof. Terence has been working on for the longest time, we also now uncovered through, say, Zahid Hamidi's trials, other stakeholders like law firms, Lewis and Co. receiving 76 million or something deposited into their accounts, and nobody would have known about it if there was no change of government, if Zahid Hamidi remained Deputy Prime Minister, and imagine if he became Prime Minister. And I'm just saying that law firms are also now part of the entire network. And if you look at beyond law firms, we saw 1MDB, Najib, shell companies being used, and it's getting harder and harder to trace. So we're just placing yayasans now in the bigger scheme of things, that people need to understand how even charities, and worse still, those that deal with religious affairs, even that is up for abuse in such a big way. And so that is what we're up against, and there's so much more work that needs to be done. I really hope that members of the diplomatic community who are present here today can also share your country's experience with us for best practice, for different ways in which we can look at a good and applicable, something that I still want to take what Hannah says, it has to be real and practical around the whole area of political financing. Thank you.
And I'll take that as the last word from you, Lalita.
Okay.
Would you like to say a few words to just end for your side?
Well, I think the court cases reveal a lot. When they're caught in their act, why businessmen, prominent companies, why they have been donating huge amount of money to their politicians' foundations. And when they're caught in the act, they claim that it is a political donation. So they see it as a way out. So this has to stop. This practice has to stop.
Thank you, Lalita. Prof. Terence.
I'd like to address the question from the NST as my closing point. I'd also like to link this to what Thomas said, why no recommendations? We repeatedly said during this presentation that what we are looking at is only the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more going on. We know so little, and we found it so hard to get information that the volume of disclosure available to us is so limited. Now, what are we talking about? We're talking about foundations which are controlled by government, by parties, by families, by businesses, by individuals. As Cynthia said, this is really very complex. When we make recommendations, we must know what we are talking about in terms of the big picture. We only know very little. So the purpose of today's forum was to put out this report to say, look, this is going on out there. We want you all to know about this. And the politicians, beware. We now have identified another avenue through which you have a possibility of raising a lot of funds, which we cannot accept, especially at this time like this. Which brings me to the second point. Why does this system prevail? For this, we must understand the structure of the state. Where does the power lie? Who has the ability to control this? This is my big disappointment with the post-2018 change. There was a possibility then to reform the structure of the state, to dismantle all this. It didn't happen. It was perpetuated. That was my point in my talk. It was perpetuated. And why did they perpetuate it? It was for the pursuit of power, to consolidate that power which they had now obtained. This is the crisis that we are dealing with today. The lack of political will on the part of politicians across the board to bring about this change that we are talking about, because it is about the pursuit and consolidation of power. That's why I'd like to close on this. We, the NGOs, have to play a role. We, the public and the media, have to play a big role in trying to bring about the change to stop this corruption that we are seeing.
Thank you, Prof. And the last word goes to YB Hana.
Okay,
Go
my
ahead.
closing remark is, based on the findings here, you can see that corruption will usually take on the two masks in the name of welfare or in the name of religion or race, right? And therefore, donors out there, Malaysians can stop this. Donors, just because it is for welfare or just because it's for religious purpose, it does not mean that you stop asking questions. And so the public must continue to press for answers, even if you're dealing with charities. That's when good governance is needed. I think good governance is needed more in an NGO or in a charity or in a church, for example. You know, you need to make sure that that is all, there is accountability. Number two, I think MACC now with this, C4 has done the work. I think the natural response for MACC after today would be to look into this report and start digging, because somebody has done the work for them. Don't just look at the yayasan itself, but look into the donors. There must be a correlation there, why some people are donating this huge amount of money for a family foundation. This is the first time I'm hearing of a family foundation. And I hope MACC will act on this report. Thank you.
And I think when we've heard so many insights from this morning's discussions, and certainly a few calls for action, I think this is something that we can actually conclude this morning's session with. And certainly if you haven't picked up a copy of this, please do go ahead and pick a copy. And I think our panelists would be free to speak to you later on after this session is over. So I would like to just thank once again to our panelists. Please give them a round of applause. For being such a great panel for this discussion on this important topic. I'd also like to thank you all for making the time to be able to come and to be able to engage with us on this vital issue. So with that, thank you very much. My name is Azrul Muhammad Khalid, signing off, and I hand it back to the organizers.
Thank you, Azrul. Members of the media, please come forward for the photo session. I would like to invite our speakers to stand and hold up the report for the photo. Thank you, members of the media. Thank you to our speakers again for sharing your comments and thoughts on the report. You may now return to your seats off stage. On behalf of C4 Center, I would like to thank Yang Muhammad Hannah Yo for joining us today at this launch. We have now come to the end of the event. To all our viewers online, thank you for taking the time to join us virtually for this launch. We hope you will join us for our future online events. To find out when the next C4 Center online event will be, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at C4 Center. To guests at Sheraton PJ Hotel, please join us for an early lunch. Your individually packed lunch can be collected at the counter at the back of the ballroom. If you have parked at the hotel, flat rate parking validation is available at the foyer. Once again,